I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 21. Cav Out Front. 12th October 1990. 101st Airborne Division Headquarters. Yanbu Airport. Yanbu, Saudi Arabia. Hawk stood, studying the map hanging on the wall of the G3's office. Lieutenant Colonel Hawk Rowe had commanded the 2nd Battalion, 17th Cavalry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault, for the past year. His combination of OH-58A Kiowa and AH-1S Cobra aircraft were the eyes of the division. Scouting out in front of the division's forward positions, the Cav earned its motto of Out Front. Typical of all Cav officers, Hawk displayed all the bravado and bluster of an independent-thinking, take-charge leader. That was the kind of leader required to command a unit that was forward of the division, operating in unknown territory and facing a hazy intelligence picture of the enemy. It was the Cav's job to bring that hazy intelligence picture into clear focus. "Hawk, how are you doing this morning?" Brigadier General Sheldon asked, joining him at the map. "Good, sir, except for that loud explosion last night. Scared the hell out of me. I couldn't go back to sleep after that. Any idea what it was?" Hawk inquired. "Yeah. It seems some UDT swimmers breached the security net in the harbor and laid a couple of limpet mines on a tanker full of aviation fuel, blew the damn ship sky high, and destroyed the dock. Luckily, one of our privates managed to shoot the diver, but we think another diver probably got away. We're going to get a Coast Guard detachment in here to start running patrol duty around the terminals now." "Wow. Still, that was the loudest explosion I'd ever heard in my life. Did we lose anyone?" Hawk asked, concerned for the welfare of the soldiers who were on guard duty there. "No, thank goodness. The NCO in charge of the guard force got the people off the dock just before it blew. The crew on the ship, however, were all killed. Seems the ship's skipper didn't take the warning seriously." Sheldon shrugged. "Such is life." Getting the hint that this discussion was over, Hawk asked, "Well, sir, what have you got for me? My boys are tired of sitting around here getting acclimated to the climate. They're ready to go hunting." Sheldon pointed at the wall map. "Intel tells us that the 2nd Iraqi Corps has 3 divisions coming this way from here. The 7th Infantry Division is located around Masadair here. Then we have the 37th Infantry Division in the vicinity of Madain Saleh and Al-Athib, and the 51st Infantry Division is around Al-Jadid." As he spoke, he pointed at each location. He paused for a second before adding, "With that corps and those divisions to the northwest of us, and this mountain range that spreads across this entire area, it means they've come down from Tabuk to get through the mountains and try to get at us. This mountainous region is actually a godsend for us, as it's giving the enemy very few options to get to the Red Sea, and us. It also means their supplies are stretched big time across this entire area of northwest and western Saudi. Damn, that's a lot of tough terrain to move through with tanks and armored vehicles," Hawk commented. "It is. What's odd is somehow it seems they're fat with tanks, tons of T-72s. But as their lines stretched, they started getting real short on fuel trucks, so they're having a problem with large movements. From what we've seen with the satellite photos and a few U-2 flights, it looks like troops are traveling in trucks to keep up with the tanks. So that gives you the 50,000-foot view of the situation. What I need you to do is start helping us get a lot deeper into the weeds. Start finding their lead elements for each of these divisions if you can. Then I need your choppers to help us find any logistics centers, supply depots, and artillery positions. We don't have the force to take on a corps, so I want to leverage our helicopters to do what we can to nail their supply lines. If we can starve those tanks and vehicles of fuel, they'll become paperweights. Combat ineffective and we won't have to worry about them. But the trick, Hawk, is your boys are going to have to fly pretty far out there, most likely alone and without much in the way of support or help." Studying the map, Hawk finally spoke up. "Sir, this is a big ask, and these positions are a long way out. I think we can make it work, but I'm going to need to set up a forward area rearm and refueling point if we're going to run an operation like this. Am I going to be able to get some help with that?" Sheldon nodded as a smile spread across his face. "I'm already on it. I spoke with Division Support Command, and they're going to establish a FARP in the vicinity of Al Ais. A security company from 2nd of the 327th will fly out in about 2 hours and set up the area to receive the CH-47s that will bring out the fuel and ammo. The DISCOM folks will be on that flight and will operate the FARP. They understand that they're the ones refueling your aircraft and rearming them, so there should be no problems." "Yeah, I remember my first exercise last year in Venice, Florida, when we were doing the night insertions into Avon Park, and the DISCOM folks didn't think it was their responsibility to assist in fueling the aircraft," Hawk mused under his breath. "Well, they understand now, so it won't be a problem. How soon do you think you can be off?" Sheldon asked. "Well, as soon as the FARP is established, we'll be out of here. I'll lead off with one troop and have the others on standby. I'll look to rotate them in so my pilots have some downtime. Unless we're running continuous life-and-death combat missions, I really don't like to push my pilots too far past their allowed flight hours per week. If you burn them out too quick, you won't have that reserve built up to call on later when the shit really hits the fan." Hawk paused for a moment as he traced his finger around the FARP, and then the positions where the enemy was likely to be. "I think I'm going to establish my CP at the FARP for now. Once we have a better bead on the enemy, I may jump it forward if we need to move the FARP forward," Hawk explained. B.G. Sheldon nodded in approval. "Good. It sounds like you know how you want to run your operations. Just get me the intel I need, and good hunting. Oh, if you do find a lucrative target, do not hesitate to call TAC Air in on it. I'd rather you use TAC Air than let the Iraqis know you may be operating nearby. These guys have some serious ADA assets set up, and I'd hate for them to start figuring out your flight paths, and you guys suddenly find yourselves flying into a hot mess." Iraqi 2nd Corps, Al-Ula, Saudi Arabia. Major General Izzat al-Duri had been dispatched from Baghdad to link up with the Iraqi 2nd Corps and find out what some of the problems were. Saddam had specifically sent him to be his personal eyes and ears, and then report back to him once he felt he had enough information. When he'd arrived a week ago, he'd set up his command post in Al-Ula, between the 7th and 37th Divisions. He wanted to take a few days to gather some information, talk privately with certain commanders and some soldiers, and then begin to formulate an opinion of what was happening here. The more time he spent here, the more he was starting to understand the enormity of the problem they were facing out west. Saudi Arabia was just a vast country that, while having a decent infrastructure built up in places, still had swaths of the country with little to no infrastructure. When Izzat had first arrived, he'd thought he would be moving and setting up a new position every few days as the headquarters moved forward. Instead, he was growing increasingly frustrated at the slow advance the Corps was making. 2nd Division was sitting in Tabuk, guarding their overextended supply lines. The 14th was also back there, a shell of what it had been after enduring multiple devastating airstrikes while attempting to move to the coast. Now the problem was fuel and maintenance. The extra tanks the divisions had been given were great for engagements when they happened, but they were eating fuel as if there was a gas station around every curve. What the division lacked was fuel trucks. The divisions just didn't have a sufficient number of fuelers to feed the tanks, and the organic supply trucks need to keep these massive army formations moving. On top of that, maintenance issues were taking their toll on the vehicles. The fine sand got into everything and ate machine parts up. Repair parts were stocked, but not at the rate that they were being needed. This problem was going to be a subject of today's meeting with the division commanders. He'd finally gotten frustrated with the current leadership in charge, and had opted to exercise some of his own special authority given to him by Saddam and get his hands dirty, so to speak. Today, The 3 division commanders would finally arrive at his office to talk privately. This would be an informal meeting over tea. No staff officers would be present. No need to muddy the waters with staff officers trying to get FaceTime with a general from Baghdad. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Have a seat," Al-Duri said, as the 3 division commanders walked into the room. He had 4 overstuffed chairs arranged around a center coffee table. The table had a thermos of hot tea and some sweet cakes and fruit. The air conditioning held the room to a comfortable 90 degrees, a significant difference from the outside temperature of 128 degrees. Once the handshakes were exchanged and everyone had their tea and was seated, Al-Duri started. "Gentlemen, I have asked you to come here today so we may discuss our logistic problems in private. From what I've been able to gather, we have 2 problems. First, a shortage of fuel for the vehicles, and second, a shortage of repair parts." 3 bobbing heads seemed to be in agreement with him. "Let's address the fuel problem first." Major General Al-Sabag, commander of the 7th Division, interrupted, "Sir, when we started this operation we had sufficient fuel to reach Tabuk, but we also had gas stations along the way that we could tap fuel from. Once we headed south, there were almost no fuel stations, and those that used to be there had been destroyed by the retreating Saudis before we got to them." The others nodded in agreement. "That is a good point, but what is the solution to the problem we now face?" Al-Duri countered. "Sir, if I may," Major General Harb Takrit, commander of the 37th Division, tried to answer. "We have a sufficient number of tankers for the trucks that are organic to our divisions. When we received the new tanks, that was wonderful, but they did not bring any fuel tankers with them. That is the cause of our existing problem. I would recommend that we prioritize the fuel in the tank trucks to our organic transports for the soldiers. The tanks can come along until they run out of fuel, and then they can sit and wait until we seize a fuel depot at Yanbu or Jeddah. The fact is, we are an infantry division, and we fight with infantry. If we feel we need the tanks, then we leave some behind and transfer fuel from those we are leaving into the few that will accompany us." "What do you think of General Harb Takrit's idea?" Al-Duri asked, looking at the others. Major General Zogby, who commanded the 51st Infantry Division, seemed to speak for himself and the other division when he said, "I think it is a very reasonable idea, sir. Plus, when you look at the terrain we are having to travel through, this isn't exactly ideal tank country. The fact is, the tanks are slowing us down. If we had gone back to our roots and focus on light, mobile, and fast infantry tactics, we would already be in Yanbu instead of stuck here with scores of tanks waiting on fuel." General Zogby then went on to add, "As we move towards the Red Sea and the positions where the Americans are entrenched, we aren't facing large tank or even mechanized units. We're facing light infantry airborne units. They may have some armor near Jeddah from the 10th Saudi Mechanized Brigade, but nothing serious. We probably do not need all the tanks we have. Between our close air support, our attack helicopters, and the few tanks we should take, we can leave the others behind and save fuel for those going forward." The room fell silent for a moment as each commander was lost in his own thoughts. This was exactly the kind of information Al-Duri had been looking for and what Saddam had sent him out here to find. Finally, Al-Duri asked, "All right, what are the negatives to this course of action?" "The negative is we continue the attack with only a quarter of our armor force," Al-Sabag said. "But what good is it if we attack with everything only to run out of fuel before we join in battle, or worse, join in battle and then run out of fuel?" "A very good point, General," Al-Duri conceded. "So it is decided. We fuel only 1/4 of our tanks to continue the advance and leave the others until we find a sufficient amount to send the tanker trucks back." Everyone nodded in agreement. General Al-Sabag was about to speak when Al-Duri cut him off. "I think I know what you're going to say. We need to get the Corps commander to approve. Let me handle that. Right now, let's focus on the second challenge we are facing to taking Yanbu." The 3 generals smiled and nodded. Now let's address our repair parts problem. Sir, if I may, MG Zogby said, I have already started cannibalizing vehicles for repair parts. If a vehicle goes down and we do not have a part to fix it, the vehicle is then stripped of its parts to keep other vehicles operational. When parts arrive, we put them on the cannibalized vehicle and get it back up and running. It is better to have one vehicle down than 4 vehicles, each waiting on one part that we can take off the cannibalized vehicle. What is your vehicle availability, General? Al-Duri asked, pleasantly surprised to see they had come up with this idea on their own and were already implementing it. If I had not initiated this program, I would be at 40% availability. By doing this, I am at 70%. Zogby explained, with a satisfied look on his face. General Zogby, that was ingenious. With forward thinkers like yourselves, I am confident we'll take Jeddah before too long, Al-Duri complimented. Thank you, Zogby, for sharing that. I hadn't gone that route yet, but hearing of your results, this sounds like it'd solve a lot of maintenance challenges my guys have been dealing with, commented General Harb to Crit. I agree. When I return to my division, I'm going to initiate this idea right away, General Al-Sabag added. Smiling, General Al-Duri explained. Gentlemen, it appears we have solved the 2 critical problems that have plagued your corps for nearly 2 months now. 2 months of lost time we can never get back. What I'm going to do now is communicate this solution to Baghdad and let them know we have found a workaround to our problem, but that we still need those repair parts and fuel tankers ASAP if we're to get this corps fully moving again. 200 hours. 13th of October, 1990. Al-Ais was a small town surrounded by high peaks and rough terrain. The only reason there was a town here at all was that the main highway from Massadar to Yanbu passed through it, creating a waypoint of sorts through the mountains. The town had a population of maybe 15,000 people. The town's buildings were typical concrete block, the same you saw in much of Saudi Arabia. On the north side was a wide wadi that came out of the mountains. It was near the town, but isolated enough. This was the site chosen for the Farpi base. It was wide and flat enough for them to store their equipment, and big enough that it could house roughly a dozen helicopters at a time if needed. At 200 hours, unbeknownst to the locals, half a dozen CH-47 heavy utility helicopters flew over the sleepy town and headed towards the wadi. Being out of the monsoon season, this was a pretty safe place to use. At least it would be until the spring rolled back around. No one had bothered to tell the local officials that the 101st was coming to town. 20 minutes after the CH-47s arrived, the last of them pulled pitch and departed, heading back to Yanbu to pick up the next load of equipment needing to be brought forward. Captain Grobe, the officer in charge of this little outpost, surveyed his soldiers, who were scattered in a circle. With the last helicopter departing, groups of soldiers began getting up and moving out to create a perimeter around the open area. They had to have the area secured in 30 minutes for the next flight of aircraft to come in. "Sergeant Crandall," Captain Grobe called out. "Sir," came a reply in the night. "Let's get this PZ marked for the next flight. I want the fuel blivets positioned on the east side of the area. Use IR chem sticks to mark those locations." "Roger, sir. I'm on it. Pathfinders have the comms up now and are ready for the aircraft to call in," Sergeant Crandall, Pathfinder Platoon Sergeant, said. As Captain Grobe squatted and studied his map, orienting himself with his surroundings, First Sergeant Simmons approached him. "Captain, the boys are getting it done and have pretty much secured the perimeter. Should have it shut down tight in 30 minutes. "Good. Last thing we need to have is an aircraft in here refueling, and a suicide car comes rolling in. Let's get an OP out a click or so off the side of this road and be watching for any vehicles coming from the northeast. Need a checkpoint as well to stop any vehicles coming into this place. Chances are when the sun comes up, we're going to have some visitors wanting to check this place out," Captain Grobe added. "Already done, sir. I had 1st Platoon establish an OP as soon as we landed. That young lieutenant knows what he's doing. He's prior service and a scout platoon member back in the 50 Deuce last year. Outstanding, Top. Thank you for staying on that. Oh, when our Saudi liaison folks get here, let's make sure we keep a couple of them near the OP. They'll be able to help explain things to the locals better than we can. A few hours later, as the call to morning prayer commenced, it was drowned out by the sound of 3 CH-47 helicopters with the sling loads of fuel blivets. Elements of the discom had already set out the pumps and hoses, so all that was needed for their little combat outpost to be operational was the fuel. A ground guide was standing by to bring in each aircraft and show them where to set the blivets down. The CH-47s were bringing in 4 of these 500-gallon blivets of JP-4. This was just a drop in the bucket of what was going to be needed to keep the helicopters fueled for what was certain to be a lot of aviation missions over the coming weeks. While Captain Grobe and First Sergeant Simmons enjoyed a cup of coffee, a young private approached them. "Excuse me, sir," he said, rendering the proper hand salute. "Whoa, Private. Don't ever salute an officer in the field, especially the captain. Got it?" A little taken aback, the private blushed and nodded. "What is it, Jarvis?" Captain Grobe asked, looking up at the baby-faced soldier who'd made the grievous error of saluting an officer while deployed in the field near the enemy. "Sir, there's a car at the checkpoint, and they're yapping in Arabic and waving their arms. I don't think they're happy to see us," young Jarvis replied. Standing up with his cup of coffee still in hand, Grobe said, "Okay, I'll be right down. Come on, First Sergeant. You have nothing better to do right now. Let's go meet the locals." Sighing, Simmons grumbled under his breath about being roped into a meet and greet with the locals. Everyone knew the First Sergeant had a temper and didn't suffer fools lightly. The two of them followed Jarvis down the trail to the entrance of their little combat outpost. Approaching the group of Saudi civilians, Captain Grobe extended his hand, and in his best Arabic offered, "Assalamu alaikum." Smiling with a surprised look on his face, the elderly man that had come out to greet them countered, "Wa alaikum assalam." "Hal tatakalam bil-Injlizya?" Captain Grobe asked, exhausting his Arabic vocabulary, as he sought to see if the man spoke any English. The Saudi officials looked at each other. Grobe wasn't sure if he'd said the right thing or if something was wrong. The Saudis began what appeared to be an argument between them. Finally, one stepped forward, while another ran back to the car and drove off. The one coming forward placed his hand over his chest. "Abdullah al-Ais." He repeated the words again, patting his chest this time. "Sir, I think he's telling you his name," First Sergeant Simmons said. "Captain Grobe," the captain said, imitating the chest patting. Abdullah smiled. "Now we're getting somewhere." Abdullah motioned for everyone to sit down on the ground, which the remaining Saudis did. Grobe and Simmons followed suit, still clinging to their coffee cups. "Captain, they're staring at our coffee cups. Should we offer some to them?" First Sergeant Simmons asked in a low whisper. "Oh shit! Now we have to entertain them too," Grobe said between clenched teeth. Looking at Abdullah, he pointed at his coffee and smiled. "You want coffee?" Abdullah looked at the cup, and then smiled and nodded in the affirmative. "Jarvis, see if you can come up with 3 cups of coffee for these gentlemen," Simmons ordered. "First Sergeant, where am I going to find 3 canteen cups for them, or the coffee?" Jarvis lamented. "Jarvis, just do it. Anyone gives you shit, send them to me. Now go, boy." Jarvis arrived back 10 minutes later with 3 canteen cups and a thermos of coffee. No cream and no sugar. The Saudis seemed pleased that they were getting coffee, but as polite as they were, they would not have objected. As everyone sat, some conversation was attempted, but nothing was understood by either side. "I need to get an interpreter assigned to us." "This is just not working," Captain Grobe was thinking when the car returned, and another Saudi gentleman was practically dragged out of the car. Words in Arabic were excitedly exchanged. I apologize that I was not here when you arrived, Captain Grobe. I, Hassan al-Ayas, am the schoolmaster in our city. My father," he pointed to the elderly gentleman who had introduced himself earlier, "is the mayor of our city." "Your English is very good, Hassan. Tell your father that I am glad to meet him," Captain Grobe said with a slight bow to the old man, who returned a head nod. The old man commenced speaking to his son in Arabic. When he finished the long dissertation, Hassan turned to Captain Grobe. "Captain, my father welcomes you. He has many questions. How long will you be here? What are your needs that we can assist you with? How many of you will come here?" Hassan asked. "I don't know how long we will be here. I was told just to get here and set up a refueling point for our helicopters. How many Americans will be here, I don't know. But I can tell you that many Americans will be passing through your town in the coming days. As to what you can do to assist us, what we need is fresh drinking water. If you will allow us, we might be able to send a few soldiers into your town to purchase some food items," Captain Grobe said, looking at the old man the whole time. Hassan immediately translated, and the old man responded. "My father says your soldiers are most welcome to purchase food in town, but he asks that they observe our laws and customs," Hassan explained. "My soldiers have received a briefing about your laws and customs and will honor them. If they do not, then they will be punished by me," Captain Grobe replied, again looking at the old man with a very determined look. The old man got the message without a translation. As they conversed about the town and the Americans, 2 Cobra helicopters and 2 OH-58s circled overhead before landing to begin refueling. In less than 5 minutes, they were off and heading northeast. Condor 2-1, Viper 1, over. Viper 1, Condor 2-1, go ahead. Viper 1 has what appears to be a recon element at coordinates. The Viper pilot read off the location to their operations group at the airfield. He'd found what he was hoping was the lead element of a larger force, some 10 miles south of Massadar, in the small village of Arar. Viper 1 was an OH-58 Kiowa helicopter hiding behind a small ridge 1 mile west of the village, which was astride the major highway from Massadar. "Roger, Viper 1. Let's move back to the west and then north and see what's up around Massadar. How's your fuel?" "Condor 2-1. Sounds good. I'm good for another 30 minutes on fuel. Turning back." "Roger, I have you in sight." The 2 aircraft joined up and moved west for 7 miles before masking behind mountainous terrain and proceeding north. Flying contour allowed them the greatest speed while maintaining a low profile. When they turned east again, they would resume nap of the Earth flight, which would not only mask them, but provide the slowest speed to approach an enemy position. The flight north to a point west of Massadar was short, as it was only 8 miles before they turned east and began NOE flight mode towards Massadar. Once they turned east, they immediately spotted what they were looking for. "Condor 2-1, Viper 1, do you see what I see?" "Do I ever? The old man is going to be buying tonight." "Condor, he buys only if we call it in first. I am QSY to hire and will call it." "Roger, Viper, Condor standing by." Viper 1 switched frequencies to the squadron operations frequency. Sabre 3, Sabre 3. Viper 1, over. After a moment that seemed like forever to Viper 1, they got their response. Viper 1, Sabre 3, go ahead. Sabre 3, Viper 1, sit rep. Viper 1, Roger, go ahead. Ready to copy? Time, 8:30 today. Location, west of Massadar 1 click. Viper 1 then sent the UTM coordinates electronically to Sabre 3. Activity, Iraqi fuel truck farm. Approximately 20 tanker trucks. We are observing. Remaining time on station, 15 mics. How copy? Viper 1 asked. Viper 1, we have good copy. You are the first. Understand you will break station in 15 mics. Sabre 3, out. Son of a bitch. Viper 1 found something and reported it, Chief Warrant Officer Sinky said to his co-pilot, Warrant Officer Ken Schuessler. Sinky was a chief warrant officer, 4th grade as he'd cut his teeth flying in Vietnam in 1970. He enjoyed flying and had several thousand hours in helicopters and was qualified in almost every helicopter that was in the Army inventory, and a few that weren't. Warrant Officer Schuessler, on the other hand, was new to flying, having just graduated from flight school in the spring, and was in his first assignment. He was front seat on the AH-1S Cobra. Well, they did have the shortest distance to travel to get to where the bad guys might be, Schuessler said over the intercom. Switching to transmit, Sinky said, Viper 1-2, Condor 3-5, over. Viper 1-2 was a quarter of a mile in front of him and hugging the terrain as they flew north. The longer distance wasn't going to give them much time to conduct a reconnaissance. Condor 3-5, Viper 1-2, go ahead. Viper, did you hear? Viper 1 found some refueling tankers. Yeah, I heard it and plotted it. They're just east of us, around Masada. I'm coming up on Fadia and am going November Oscar Echo to their position. Roger, we have you covered, Sinky replied, and immediately switched to intercom. Okay, Ken, he's going no-E, so we need to be sure to have him covered. Roger, Ken replied, and focused the M73 gun sight just behind the little bird. Viper 1-2 commenced his NOE flight pattern, hugging the ground, though it looked more like he was hovering with motion than flying. He was literally peeking around hillsides and over hilltops before sprinting to the next position that offered some concealment. As he eased up the side of a small hill, the vast wadi became exposed to him. The paved main highway from Madain Saleh to Masada lay before him. A few agricultural areas could be seen in the familiar round patterns common to the area. What really interested him was the large parking area with tanks in neat rows. Condor 3-5, we have hit the mother lode. Shit, I'm looking at maybe 50 tanks all parked in a neat formation. We've got to get an airstrike in on this one. Viper 1-2, pull back and send a sit rep. You'll probably need to get some altitude, so let's pull back a few miles. Roger, let me just get a good count and location. Wait 1. Sergeant Basra was an infantry soldier in the 21st Armored Brigade. He was assigned an SA-7 shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missile to use to protect the tanks. He didn't care for this assignment one bit. It was hot as hell out, and he was just sweltering in this heat. But infantry soldiers in an armored brigade were used for all sorts of ash and trash jobs, as the tankers were the golden boys. And to make things worse, he now had to carry this weapon in addition to his own AK-47. At least we aren't moving for some time. We're flat out of fuel, he thought with a grin, at how these golden boys were nothing without fuel. Sighing, he realized sitting here on the outskirts of Fadla wasn't too bad. He had a roof over his head, clean water, and fresh food, not the army combat rations. The people, however, were not all that friendly. They weren't hostile either, so he supposed that counted for something. As his mind started to wander to thoughts of home, he thought he heard something. What in the name of Allah is that? Sounds like a helicopter, but none that I have heard before. He was thinking when he rose and walked to the edge of the palm grove. Looking southwest, he saw the small helicopter skirting along the ridge and then beginning to climb. Whoa, that's an American helicopter. Fumbling with the SA-7, he quickly got it off his shoulder and was attempting to recall the firing procedure for the weapon. As he mounted it on his shoulder, he initiated the launch sequence. When he heard the tonal sound indicating the seeker head had a solid lock on the helicopter, he pulled the trigger. Whoosh! The rocket leapt out of the tube, haphazardly at first before the main engine kicked in, and it took off after its target with lightning speed. He watched in stunned, satisfied silence as the missile left a small white trail as it streaked towards the helicopter. It changed course slightly to focus on the helicopter as it tried to make a maneuver at the last minute. Boom! The missile either got close enough that its warhead went off, or it slammed into the helicopter. In either case, it blew it apart. The burning wreckage fell to the earth in a display of fire and black smoke. Basra couldn't believe it. He'd just single-handedly shot down an American helicopter. He unceremoniously broke out in a happy dance before making a beeline back to where the rest of his unit and his commander were. I need to tell my commander the news. I might get promoted for this. Might be able to get a transfer back to an infantry unit. Allah be praised. I finally did something right. Something big. Viper 1-2, Condor 3-5. Over. Condor repeated the call 2 more times, with no answer. He hadn't seen Viper go down as he'd turned to head home. As he looked back in the direction where Viper had been, he saw something. A column of black smoke rising in the direction of where his friend had been. Viper 1-2 was gone. Chapter 22. Scud Attack. 14th October 1990. ODA 52226. United Arab Emirates. They'd been on the ground now going on 5 days. In that time frame, they still hadn't found the Scud launchers they'd been sent to destroy. They'd found several missile trailers, so they knew the launcher had to be nearby. They were also starting to run low on food. If they didn't find the launchers in the next 2 days, they were going to call in an airstrike on the missile trailers. That would at least deny the launchers more missiles to fire. Crawling up next to Weekly, Lieutenant Harris whispered, "Is there some other place we should scout or look at to find that launcher?" Weekly had been asking himself that question a lot for the last 48 hours. They'd found a good hide location, and they'd spotted half a dozen missile trailers, which meant the launcher had to be close. But where? Turning slightly to look at Harris, Weekly replied, "I think we're going to have to. We've got maybe an hour of light left. Unless you're opposed, I'd like to take AD with me and scout this other ridge over here. I'd wager that launcher is probably hidden here." Harris looked at the ridge on the map, doing a quick calculation. "That's like 6 kilometers away. You'd be a long way from help if you ran into trouble. You sure you just want to take AD with you?" AD, or Accidental Discharge, aka Staff Sergeant Joe Bruiser, was their resident sniper. He'd earned his nickname during sniper training when he had an accidental discharge of his pistol at the range. It had embarrassed the guy to no end, but the nickname had stuck. Now he wore it like a badge of honor. "Yeah, if it's just the 2 of us, we can move faster. Also, if we happen to find that launcher and we see it getting to fire before we can get an airstrike called in, then maybe he can disable it before they're able to launch it," Weekly explained to Lieutenant Harris. "Okay, do it. Just make sure you bring an extra battery for the Sintgar's radio. I'll let HQ know where you'll be headed so they'll be ready in case you find something and need to call in a strike." A few hours later, Weekly and AD left the hide location and started their 6-kilometer hike to the next ridge, where they believed the launcher vehicle was waiting. Battery, 2nd Rocket Battalion, United Arab Emirates. Major Yusuf smiled as he listened to the order. He'd finally been given permission to launch his first salvo of Scuds at the Americans. His battery of 4 launchers had been twiddling their thumbs in the desert now for nearly 2 weeks, waiting for these orders. When his battery had left the port, he'd split them down into 3 sections: his launcher section, missile section, and headquarters and service sections. All 3 had set up shop in a different wadi. This was done to disperse his force. 6 days ago, one of his soldiers thought they had heard the sound of a helicopter. It had turned out to be nothing, but it had caused him to break his launchers up. He'd had a launcher paired with their 3 missile trucks and support elements. Now he had the launchers all together, where he could concentrate his limited air defense assets to protect the launchers themselves. Without those vehicles, the missiles were useless. "Did we finally get our launch orders?" Captain Ibrahim asked. Turning to face his executive officer, Major Yusuf replied, "We did. I need you to work with the fire control officer and make sure they get these coordinates entered in. Also, once we fire this first volley, I want the launch vehicles moved to the next position. Make sure we have another missile for each launcher standing by at the location. We're to expend all 24 missiles before dawn." Captain Ibrahim nodded slowly at the command. It was a tall order. It could take upwards of half an hour to an hour to reload a launcher. If they were supposed to launch all 4 missiles for each launcher, it'd take roughly 4 hours just to get them reloaded. That didn't take into consideration moving them to a new location after each launch. Seeing the look of concern on his executive officer's face, Major Yusuf knew what he was thinking. "You don't have to say it. I know, and I agree with you that it is going to be impossible to launch all 4 missiles if we have to relocate after each launch. I do not think it is safe for us to stay put for all 4 launches, but I do believe we can move forward by launching 2 missiles from each firing position. Go ahead and place a call to our missile trucks and have 6 trucks drive to our location. I think that is a wise choice. I fear once we launch these missiles, it won't be long before the Americans will send helicopters or fighters to come search for us. Muscat is not that far from our positions for a fighter plane or a helicopter." Yusuf agreed with that thought as well. This first day's worth of launches would likely be the only launches they'd have before the enemy started to scour this area looking for them. "I will get everything ready now. We should be able to commence our first launch within the next 20 minutes, Captain Ibrahim declared, and then headed out the tent to see to it. Weekly extended his hand down to AD, who grabbed it, allowing Weekly to pull him up. They were nearly to the top of the ridge where he thought the launcher vehicles were located. Suddenly, the Sintgar's handset crackled to life. "Blue 1, Blue 6. Taking a knee, Weekly grabbed the handset and depressed the push-to-talk button. He waited for the familiar beeping sound, letting him know the frequency-hopping radio had synced. "Blue 6, Blue 1, send it. Blue 1, we're seeing movement. 6 launcher vehicles just started moving. I believe they may be headed towards you. How copy?" If they are sending vehicles this way, then those launchers really are nearby. But if they're sending the reload vehicles this way, that means they must be readying to launch. Crap, we need to find those vehicles. ASAP, he thought. "Blue 6, that's a good copy. We're almost to the top of the ridge. See if you can raise headquarters and get some birds in the air. If we find the launchers, we may not have much time to take them out before they fire." "That's a good copy. Keep us apprised. Out." Standing outside his command tent, Major Yusuf looked at his watch. It was 20:49 hours. They were nearly ready to launch. His ears told him the missile trucks had arrived. "Sir, we're ready to fire. Just waiting on your final orders," Ibrahim informed him. "Excellent. Good job on getting them ready so quick. Which targets are we firing at first?" Yusuf wanted one final check before the missiles fired. Once they were on their way, they couldn't change their targets. The 985 kilogram or 2,100 pound high explosive warhead would pulverize whatever it hit. The Scud-Ds they were firing were a much improved version of what they'd had during the Iran-Iraq War. Back then, they had been making do with the Scud-Bs, which had a range of 300 kilometers and a CEP, or circular error of probability, of 450 meters. The new D variants their Soviet allies had given them had a CEP of 50 meters and a range of 700 kilometers, making this variant of the missile a hell of a lot more deadly. Ibrahim replied confidently, "2 missiles are targeted at the coalition headquarters building located on the Military Technical College campus, the other 4 missiles at the Muscat International Airport. Once the missiles impact, the Unit 999 members will give us a BDA assessment so we can adjust the coordinates when we move to the next firing location." "Once again, Captain, you continue to impress. When I am promoted to battalion commander, I will be able to rest easy knowing you will take my place here," Yusuf said. Moments later, the first Scud missile fired. It lit up the night sky for a brief moment as the missile continued to gain altitude. Seconds after the first launch, the 5 subsequent missiles took to the sky, racing after the first. Weekly had just made it over the top of the ridge when the darkness of the evening was broken by the sudden flash of the missile's ignition and then its steady stream of flame as it now accelerated into the sky. Moments later, it was joined by 5 additional missiles. "Damn it, we're too late," Weekly thought, angry at himself for not having tried to come over here earlier. "Let's not worry about this one, AD. We need to try to disable those launchers before they fire any others," Weekly said to his friend and teammate. "I just need a clear line of sight and I'll disable those missiles," the sniper replied. It took them a few minutes to get in position, but once they had a solid view down into the wadi below, they spotted what they were looking for. Despite the moon being largely hidden in the high cloud cover, they could still make out some of the vehicles. They had some low-light running lights on, and a few ground guides. "You see that, Weekly? I count 6 launcher erectors, 6 missile trucks reloading them right now, and then over there?" He pointed to the far side of the wadi. "That has to be the fire control and headquarters element. Those 2 BTRs have a lot of antennas on them." "Yeah, I see 'em. Look to the right of them. You've got at least 1 SA-9 Gaskin and a ZSU-23. Those air defense vehicles would make it tough for a helicopter or low-flying aircraft to attack them." "What do you want to do? Call it in or try to disable the missiles?" AD asked. "I'm going to call them in. As much as I want you to just shoot the missiles in hopes of disabling them or even blowing them up, if you open fire, it'll give away our position and the rest of the team. There has to be at least 200 Iraqis down there, which means they likely have at least a company of infantry supporting them. If there's a company, there's a battalion nearby. We're not going to lose an ODA team to take out a few scuds. We'll call in the flyboys and let them make a run," Weekly said in frustration. This was not how he wanted things to go down. Weekly pulled out his map and got a rough idea of where the launchers were. In minutes, he was on the Horn with their headquarters element. Lieutenant Harris had already relayed what was going on, and there was a flight of 4 F-16s inbound to their location. They'd arrive on the scene in less than 20 minutes. "Major Yusuf!" a sergeant shouted as he burst into the command tent. "What is it, Sergeant?" "Sir, we just got a message from the Dubai Air Defense Group. They said they spotted at least 4 American planes headed our direction," the sergeant blurted out. "Damn it, I was hoping we'd get a couple of missiles off before this happened." "Alert our own air defense vehicles, now go," Yusuf ordered. "Captain Ibrahim." "Yes, sir," Ibrahim said as he came into the tent. "We have inbound American aircraft. Get our missiles fired as fast as you can. It's time to break camp and get the hell out of here," Yusuf ordered as he moved to pack up a few things. The soldiers around him were already breaking down the inside of the tent, and the tent itself. They needed to get out of the area. "It looks like they're getting ready to fire. When are those fast movers supposed to get here?" AD asked. Weekly looked at his watch. "Soon," was all he said. AD shook his head. "I'm going to try and put a bullet into each of those missiles. Maybe I can damage something." Weekly reached a hand out, placing it on AD's arm. "Don't. I know you want to. I do too, but we'll give away our position. Right now they have no clue we're here, which means we can keep raining airstrikes down on them. That's more important than trying to put a bullet in each missile." AD struggled with that decision, but eventually he nodded. Moments later, 2 more Scuds lifted off into the air. Then a 3rd missile took off. Before the remaining 3 could get airborne, all hell broke loose around the wadi. The ZSU opened fire with their quad 23mm autocannon, sending red tracers into the night sky. The SA-9 fired off 1 missile, then a 2nd, before it exploded into a giant fireball. 2 black objects whipped past their heads at lightning speed. Seconds later, a series of explosions erupted on the ground. The ZSU swiveled its turret and continued to fire after the 2 fighter planes. Then the ZSU exploded when a missile slammed into it. 2 more black objects flew over the area, releasing more bombs across the wadi. The 3 missiles that hadn't been fired were destroyed, blown up on the ground before they had a chance to get airborne. As the fighters flew back to base, more aircraft came over the radio, asking for more possible locations to bomb or look for more launchers. Weekly spent the next 10 minutes directing them to a handful of places where he thought they might be. Seeing the fighters attack a couple of other positions made him feel good about not having AD try to snipe at the missiles. They were causing far more damage calling in airstrikes and directing fighters than they could have done on their own. Chapter 23. National Guard makes their case. 16th October 1990. Situation Room, White House, Washington, D.C. "Good morning, gentlemen. Keep your seats," the president said as he walked into the morning briefing. All the key players involved in the war were present, along with a few others that had been asked to attend. Chief among them was Lieutenant General Conway, Chief of the National Guard Bureau. He had been vocal about the National Guard combat and round-out units in particular not being called up yet. Usually when their parent unit deployed, they went with them to fill in any gaps and augment the division, like the 48th Infantry Brigade with the 24th Infantry Division and so on. In August, someone had made the decision not to deploy the 48th Infantry Brigade with the 24th ID like they were supposed to have. Instead, they'd deployed the 197th Infantry Brigade at Fort Benning, Georgia, with the division instead. Several active duty divisions were manned at 2 brigades, with the 3rd Brigade being a National Guard brigade. The National Guard Brigade trained with the active duty division on division exercises, to include TWTs, so it was odd for them not to go with their parent units. Turning to the briefing officer, Lieutenant Colonel Atwell, the president gave the go-ahead nod. "Good morning, sir. Today's brief will cover actions in the past 48 hours, naval forces in the region, Air Force assets being employed, and issues to be resolved with the National Guard call-up. First slide, please." As it appeared on the large screen in the front of the room, Atwell continued, "Sir, in the past 48 hours, the situation has been somewhat stable. CENTCOM continues to receive forces and is positioning them throughout the region where needed. The 82nd Airborne, located in Jeddah, has continued to hold the line. They're still heavily outnumbered, but air and helicopter support have continued to prove vital in blunting each Iraqi assault. At this point, we believe the Iraqis are looking to just dig in and hold where they are." A red dot appeared on the map slide of Saudi Arabia, indicating the location of Medina Ridge. The 101st Airborne Division Air Assault has moved from Jeddah and has established itself in Yanbu. It's moving forces to the east to block the roads into Yanbu and Jeddah. Again, the pointer moved to indicate the location of Yanbu and the positions the 101st was looking to capture and hold. "Excuse me, Colonel, but is the entire 101st Division deployed now?" the president asked. "Yes, sir. Their last combat unit is in the air as we speak, and should be landing in Yanbu in 3 hours. That will complete their deployment," Colonel Atwell replied. "Please continue," the president directed. "CENTCOM continues to position forces in Oman, with the 24th Infantry Division being headquartered in Fahud and the 1st Cavalry Division being headquartered in Fallujah. These 2 units, along with the 197th Infantry Brigade, which is serving under the 24th Infantry Division, have had some of their vehicles delivered and should be completely deployed by the end of the month. The 1st Brigade of the 2nd Armored Division is under the command of the 1st Cavalry Division." Before Colonel Atwell could continue, Lieutenant General Conway jumped in. "Sir, if I may." The president turned in his chair. It took a second for him to recognize who had spoken. When he did, he gestured for the general to continue. "Sir, both the 24th and the 1st Cav have round-out brigades from the National Guard that should have been called up and deployed with those divisions. Instead, the Army leadership attached 2 active duty brigades and sent those with the 2 divisions. This is a breach of faith with the National Guard and needs to be corrected. National Guard units and divisions fought with distinction in World War I, World War II, and Korea. In World War II, the 29th was in the first wave at Normandy. The 35th landed in southern France and fought all the way to Austria. The 40th and 45th fought in Korea. They shouldn't be shut out like they were in Vietnam. The more he spoke, the more his emotions rose. Looking at General Powell, the President said, "Care to explain this one?" "Sir, we did deploy 2 active duty brigades in place of the National Guard brigades. Your Executive Order 112727 ordered a selective reserve call-up of 200,000 personnel for a 90-day period, not a full call-up to last for the duration of the crisis. In light of this, we felt there would not have been sufficient time to mobilize those units and have them undergo certification at the National Training Center and deploy before their 90-day clock would be up. As of right now, we have 19 National Guard units in country with 482 soldiers from 13 states. We believe that if we go to partial mobilization, that would lock people in for a 24-month period. Then we can call up these other combat units. Right now, Mr. President, General Schwarzkopf is calling for support units, not combat units." "What are some of the units currently deployed from the National Guard?" the President asked. "The 1241 Adjutant General Company, it's a postal unit. The 1207 Water Purification Company, the 1158th Movement Control Detachment, and the 382nd Public Affairs Detachment have all been called up. The 719th Transportation Company is deploying right now and will be attached to the 101st to assist in ground transportation for that unit." Interrupting, Conway countered, "Those units were low priority for call-up, and yet they were the first to go." With a touch of anger in his voice, Powell said, "Those, General, were the guards with personnel and equipment ready for deployment. As a matter of fact, we're seeing a pattern of the National Guard Bureau trying to fix all its broken unit equipment by moving units up on the deployment list, so when they link up with their active duty counterparts, they have to be issued new equipment just so they can operate and function with the rest of the division." "All right, gentlemen," interjected Mr. Cheney. "We'll take this up after this meeting in my office. Continue, Colonel." Marine units in theater are the 1st Marine Division and the 2nd Marine Division. The 1st Marine is located on Masira Island and is conducting training there. The 2nd is afloat at this time. Atwell paused so the red dot could point out where Masira Island was located. Colonel Atwell pointed to western Saudi Arabia again. Ground activity in the past 48 hours has been minimal. The 101st Air Cavalry Squadron is conducting a reconnaissance to the east, locating units of the 2nd Iraqi Corps. The 2nd Republican Guard Corps is maintaining its positions around Medina. In the east, the 1st Republican Guard Corps has established positions across the UAE. It appears that they're moving one division to the area around Kalba, Fujairah, and Khor Fakkan. This gives them nearly a corps level of forces along the Gulf of Oman and the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. Atwell paused long enough for this information to register with the President. Bush then asked, "What about naval activity? It was either them or the Iranians that managed to get lucky and sink a couple of supply ships. Have we hunted them down yet?" Admiral Kelso answered this question. "Not yet, Mr. President. I've tasked a few submarines to work on that. They're just now starting to arrive on station and will begin to prosecute the hunt." Colonel Atwell waited for a moment before continuing. "Sir, recent naval activity in the area allowed the USS Florida to follow a freighter through the minefield in the Strait of Hormuz. Although the Iranians claim responsibility for the strait, this minefield was a joint venture by the Iraqi and Iranian navies. Once the Florida completed its passage, it was then ordered to sink the Russian bulk carrier Kuzma Minin, as she was suspected and confirmed to be carrying Scud missiles that were offloaded in Sakr. The Florida deployed SEAL Team 2, which did the job nicely with all team members recovered. The Florida is currently awaiting further orders. On the negative side, it appears that an Iraqi underwater demolition team got into the port of Yanbu and blew up a tanker ship that was taking on aviation fuel. The crew, the ship, and the dock were all lost. No soldiers were lost. However, there were only 3 docks at this port, so this attack effectively took out a third of its capabilities. CENTCOM is requesting some Coast Guard port security units with patrol boats to be dispatched, Atwell concluded. That's probably a good idea, the president opined, and the note-takers made a note of it. Those units were activated back in August, the 22nd, if I recall. Have they not been sent over yet? He looked at Admiral Kelso. Sir, I can't say. The Coast Guard is under the Department of Transportation, so I've had no visibility on those units. With your say-so, we can pull them under DOD for this operation, Mr. Cheney interjected. Make it happen and get them over there pronto. We can't have ships being destroyed while in the harbors and dockside, the president directed. Admiral, you were going to cover ships in the area today? Yes, sir. Currently, we have the Saratoga Battle Group in the Red Sea supporting Softate Airborne Corps. It consists of the USS Saratoga, the Biddle and the Philippine Sea, both guided missile cruisers, the Spruance, a destroyer, the Sampson, a guided missile destroyer, and the Elmer Montgomery and the Thomas C. Hart, both frigates. In the Arabian Sea, we have the USS Kennedy, though she'll be replaced by Battle Group Alpha at the beginning of next month. The USS Midway will be the new flagship and have a complement of ships equal to the Saratoga Battle Group. I thought the Eisenhower was in the Red Sea. Did Saratoga replace her? Yes, sir. Eisenhower was at the end of a 6-month deployment in the Med. We rushed her to the Red Sea until we could get Sarah there, Admiral Kelso said. What about the battleships? Are we going to be using them in this fight? The president asked. Yes, sir. One is on the East Coast and one is on the West Coast. We're forming up battle groups around them and they'll be heading out shortly. They'll be linking up with the amphibious fleet soon and exercising with them. Okay, what does the Air Force have in country now? The president asked, looking at Colonel Atwell. Sir, the Air Force has the 14th Air Division, which has A-10, F-15, F-16, F-111, and F-117 aircraft. They're located for the most part in Egypt and Oman. The 15th Air Division has RF-4C, F-4G anti-radar aircraft, EC-130 Compass Card, and E-8A Joint Stars aircraft. The 15th is also split between Oman and Egypt. The 1610 Air Division has C-130 Medevac aircraft and is operating out of Oman. The 740 Composite Wing is in Incirlik, Turkey. We're still negotiating with Turkey to allow us to use them when we start hitting inside Iraq. Is there a problem with Turkey? The president inquired, an eyebrow raised at this sudden development. Sir, there's always a problem with Turkey, Mr. Baker said. They feel that they should have been consulted about our actions before we got into it with Saddam. They feel that he's the strongest leader to keep the Kurds in check, and really don't want to see him hurt or removed from power. Well, tell them to talk some sense into Saddam. If he leaves Saudi, the UAE, and Kuwait, this entire thing ends, the president said with heat to his words. Looking back at Colonel Atwell, he asked, Do we have any B-52s involved? Yes, sir, and they're under the 7th Air Division based out of Diego Garcia. After a momentary pause, the president looked at Powell. Have we received an assessment from Schwarzkopf on what he thinks he's going to need if we have to push Saddam out of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait? Sir, we have, and it's going to be a much larger package. If he has to move against the Iraqis, he feels he'll need the 7th Corps from Germany and the 1st ID from Kansas. In addition, he wants 3 more brigades, which are going to have to come from the National Guard, along with 2 field artillery brigades, also located in the National Guard. The active army doesn't have 8-inch artillery any longer. It was all transferred to the National Guard, and all the multiple rocket launchers outside of divisions are located in the National Guard now as well. Don't we have this stuff in the Army Reserve? The president asked, with some frustration in his voice. Sir, the bulk of our combat units are in the National Guard. The bulk of service support units are in the Army Reserve, and we've called up several of those units to assist as backfill in Europe and stateside, Mr. Cheney answered. But Schwarzkopf hasn't asked for the additional combat forces yet, has he? The president asked. No, sir, he has not, but we anticipate he will soon, Cheney countered. Okay, Dick, Colin. Let's continue this conversation in my office this afternoon. But before I leave to get ready for this next meeting with the Department of Energy, I want to know more about this Scud attack from the other day. Since it wasn't included in this brief, which I find odd, how bad did we get hit? A few of the generals squirmed in their seats a bit at the question. Colonel Atwell, for his part, just looked at General Powell. Finally, Cheney asked, "Do you want to tell him, Colin, or should I?" General Powell let out a sigh, as his shoulders sank a little bit. "I'll do it." Powell turned to look at the president, who now had a curious look on his face. "Sir, last night around 2100 hours local time, the Iraqis initiated their first Scud attack of the war. This was a weapon they used extensively during the Iran-Iraq War to the tune of a little more than 500 missiles. At the time, they were using the Scud-B missiles, which honestly were terrible missiles. The Soviets, however, have provided them with the Scud-Ds, which have much greater accuracy. This greatly increases the likelihood of hitting their intended target. The D model also has an improved range of up to 700 kilometers. The president held a hand up for a moment to stop Powell. "I get it. They launched some missiles at us. Get to the point. How many did they launch? What did they hit? How bad is our damage? And did we manage to locate and destroy any of the launchers?" The slight pause in responding to his question let the president know something bad had happened. "Mr. President, during the night, a Special Forces A-team managed to find the location of one Scud unit, but not before they were able to fire off a volley. The soldiers then called in an airstrike, which successfully managed to destroy all 6 launchers. They continued to scour the area for more launchers and did find a few more, not too far from this first group, and destroyed them as well." "Ah, this sounds good, General. So I take it they got some licks in too?" Powell grimaced. "They did, and it was bad. 4 missiles hit the Military Technical College General Schwarzkopf had established as his CENTCOM headquarters. One of the missiles scored a direct hit on one of the buildings being used as a barracks. It struck around 2123 hours, so a lot of folks were already in the building. They're still sifting through some of the rubble, but current death count is 391 killed and another 248 injured. There are still another 112 missing, likely still buried in the smoldering ruins." "Jesus, Colin. The media is going to have a field day with this once they learn how many people died in this attack. Tell me this was the worst of it," the president said, a bit taken aback by the staggering number of killed. "I'm afraid not, sir. We had another 122 killed from the other 3 hits the campus took, and another 384 injured. The airport took 6 hits. We didn't have as many casualties at the airport, but we did lose a number of aircraft. 12 fighters were destroyed outright, with another 29 aircraft sustaining some sort of damage. The port also took 3 hits. We didn't lose any ships, but one of the missiles did hit a nearby warehouse housing ammunition. The entire dump went up, which caused 2 more nearby warehouses to explode. All told, we had some 672 killed and another 892 injured," Powell explained. The president just shook his head. Finally, he asked, "How many people have we lost in this war? I mean, we're a little more than 2 months into this thing. How are we doing?" I'd have to get back to you on the exact specifics," Powell replied. Lieutenant General Conway blurted out, "If you include the KIAs from the Scud attack, it brings our total KIAs up to 2,157. Add in our wounded, and it's another 5,632 more." The president nodded at the National Guard commander, almost surprised that he readily knew the number, and Powell had not. Shaking his head, the president stood. "Gentlemen, I think we've covered what we needed to for this meeting. I need to leave now for a meeting with some folks from the Department of Energy. We now have an oil crisis to handle on top of this." Later, that same day. "Come in and have a seat," the president indicated as Cheney, Powell, and Vuono entered the Oval Office, followed by Sununu. "Where's Conway?" "Sir, for this meeting I thought it best that we not have him present. The man gets a bit emotional, and while I can't blame him, we don't need that at this point," Powell said. As if on cue, the side door opened, and the steward entered with a tray of coffee and cups, the correct number. How does he know every time? The president wondered. After the steward poured the coffee and departed, the president asked, "Okay, what's the story with the National Guard units? Why didn't we follow the planned procedures?" Cheney fielded the question. "Sir, this whole war started really quickly and kind of left us with little initial choice. What the active army does well, the National Guard does not. And what the Guard does well, the active army does not. The two have an integral function and role in supporting each other. The active army does fire and maneuver very well. The National Guard units do not. When the war initially broke out, that's what we needed right off the bat. With the National Guard, each year, at their 2-week summer training, they're evaluated by active Army officers and NCOs. When we review the after-action reports, it's obvious that the National Guard units aren't up to par in most cases. A lot of pressure is put on the active Army evaluators to make the reports glowing, as it's all political in the Guard with officer promotions. Case in point, last summer, an infantry battalion from the 35th Infantry Division was rated as bad as it gets, with the evaluator pointing the finger at the incompetence of the battalion commander. On the last day of the 2-week drill, the battalion commander was relieved, promoted to full colonel, and put in charge of their public affairs office. His brother was the governor. The summer before last, General Marsh was senior evaluator for a National Guard division. His summation was, and I quote, "I can think of no national emergency to include nuclear war that would warrant the activation of this division. The only real time they have to train is on the 2-week summer exercise. 1 weekend a month is just not sufficient, as some weekends are taken up with off-the-wall stuff. Company Christmas party, as an example." "Okay, I'm getting the picture. What was Conway saying about taking low-priority units and deploying them before higher-priority units?" "Sir," Vuano said, "we have a TPFD, time-phased force deployment schedule, and it has prioritized units for deployment based on the plan developed and the TPFD designed for that plan. Naturally, those units with the higher ratings for personnel, training, and equipment have the higher priority. Each night, CENTCOM sends us what type of unit they need. The next day at FORCECOM, they pull up the TPFD and see what the top priority unit is to fill that need. If it's a National Guard unit or a reserve unit, FORCECOM contacts Guard Bureau or OCAR 5 and tells them that we're going to activate that unit. With the Guard Bureau, they'll come back and offer another unit that generally has a lower priority because of lack of equipment or personnel. They're attempting to get their units all fixed by having us activate the unit and then get them the equipment they need to be in C1 status. Sometimes they use the excuse that they want to get every state involved and therefore don't want to take too many units from one state." John Sununu interrupted to add, "To be honest, General, from a PR standpoint, that's not a bad idea. Having the National Guard units from the various states increases public support for the war if we get into a shooting match any greater than what we have right now." "Okay, I understand the priority issue now. What about the roundout brigades? Why did we not deploy them with the parent divisions?" the President pressed. "Sir, the 3 brigades were the 48th, the 155th, and the 256th. First, they're not fully trained, and should have a rotation at the National Training Center before we send them over. To send them over in their current state of training would result in a higher-than-average number of casualties if they went into combat. We recommend that each of those brigades go through a rotation at NTC and pass the tests before they're deployed. To do that, they'll have to be mobilized, which will be a 1-month process, then deploy to the NTC, which is a 10-day exercise. then 2 weeks for the exercise, and another 10 days to return to home station. All told, we're looking at a month and a half. On a 90-day call-up, they couldn't even get in country before we would be bringing them home. And you're confident that they lack the degree of training needed for this operation? The President asked. Yes, sir. The last evaluation of the 48th recommended that the brigade commander be relieved, as the evaluators considered him unstable. When the 256th was last evaluated, it was noted they had poor morale issues, 7 General Vuono said. Sir, a big argument on the National Guard side of the coin is that they feel that if we do activate and send their units over, and they do well, then Congress will reduce the size of the active army, as the National Guard can do the same job at a much cheaper cost. So eventually we're going to have to activate them, is what you're telling me? The President replied. Probably, sir, Cheney interjected. Another part of the problem is education. The officers and non-coms haven't had the military schooling that the active soldiers have. They have the opportunity just like the active soldiers to attend, but they don't because of civilian jobs or family. Thus, in many cases, when activated, they have the rank but not the knowledge to do the jobs. They can do the job adequately on weekend drills and the 2-week summer training exercise, but for sustained combat, they lack the education. Now, in some MOSs, they're on par with the active duty soldiers. For instance, their helicopter pilots are as good as, and in some cases, better than the active pilots, as many of the National Guard pilots are full-time pilots with police departments, fire departments, medical evacuation units, or even airlines. We do take them on an individual basis. Their aviation mechanics are excellent, especially one Guard Aviation Maintenance Unit from Maryland. Okay, I get the picture, but when this is over, we need to rework the issue so this doesn't come up again. Either they're round out brigades and deploy with the unit or they aren't, and can wait to be called up, the President said. Anything else we need to discuss? Sir, what do we tell Conway? Cheney asked. Tell him to sit tight. They'll get the call. The President rose and turned to the Resolute desk, signaling that the meeting was over. Once everyone had left, the President asked Sununu, John, what's going on with the price of oil? That meeting with the DOE people didn't exactly make me feel good. Obviously, having the Strait closed and most of the Middle East oil closed off has put a crimp on the supply. Fortunately, the oil fields in West Africa and Venezuela are starting to pick up the slack. Heck, now that we've allowed our own oil production to increase, we should see the supply start to meet the demand. I think I'm going to open the strategic oil reserves. The price of a barrel of oil has gone from $22 a barrel prior to the war to $75. We need to bring it back down, the President announced. John didn't say anything right away. Finally, he asked, Do you think that's wise? This war is likely going to drag on for some time. Why not wait and see how things play out? Bush shook his head. Reagan started this effort to depress oil at the end of his term. I've continued it. The policy is working. The Soviet Empire is about to crack and fall apart. Look at Germany and Poland. No, we need to keep the pressure on them. The last thing we need is $75 a barrel becoming the new norm, or worse, the price moving higher. It's bad enough that they're becoming the primary supplier in Europe. We can't let this oil war bail them out, not with them on the ropes like this. We need to think long-term, John. This war is a distraction they've instigated. Let's not let them win.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.